Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the last Real Business of Wine session of the week. It's been a really busy week. We've been all over the place. We've been to India. We've all sorts of stuff. And tonight actually is a great way to finish the week because we're looking at alternative media with two absolute stars of two very different ways of communicating with people, neither of which would have been possible, turn the clock back 5-10 years. So looking at my screen in no particular order, I've got Elizabeth Schneider, whose podcast and who has a book called Wine for Normal People, which is exactly the way I see the world. And I think that wine people are not normal people. I like a lot of wine people, but they're not necessarily the same as everybody else. And Saoirse Holloway, who has something called UK Wine Hour, which actually I think probably needs to be renamed. Because it isn't just UK. You've got people from all over the place coming in. So I think actually it probably ought to be World Wine Hour, but some huge number of impressions every Thursday evening, and all done through Twitter chat, effectively using the hashtag UK Wine Hour. And my partner in crime, Polly Hammond, who's always here helping keeping this ball in the air. I should warn everybody that maybe good news for you, that my signal may go down at any time and I may disappear from your screens, but I know that Polly will keep the whole thing going. And so what we're going to do is kick off with just a general question. And I'd like to start actually with Saoirse, because the idea of people talking about wine on Twitter to each other for an hour or so, it is actually quite an odd idea in some ways. I'm sure people who don't do it and have never heard of it would be surprised. But I know that last night, Gavin Quinney, who's a very good friend, was absolutely delighted to have his wine feature on your UK Wine Hour and was over the moon about it. So Saoirse, tell us a little bit about how it all started, what it is and how it's working.
Okay. Well, thank you for having me on to start with, and also congratulations on the huge success of Real Biz Wine. I'm so impressed. It's wonderful. Absolutely been fantastic. And I wish I'd been able to join more. But yeah, UK Wine Hour will actually be 5 years old in July, which I find quite astonishing, really. I don't know where this time has gone. And in the beginning, I started it because I had already started a wine tourism company at that point. And I thought, how can I raise my online profile? And I was aware that in the US, there were quite a few Twitter chats about wine, but usually they were long after our bedtime here in Europe. So I thought, well, maybe I should do something like that. So I did. And I decided the following Thursday, I searched to see if anyone had ever used a hashtag UK Wine Hour before. Had never been used. So I thought, oh, I'll have that. Registered it to me, and the following Thursday I kicked off, and it was slow to start, obviously, as these things are, and I had met a few people through Vivino who took part initially, and they helped me get it going off the ground, and gradually, just purely organically, it has grown and grown and grown, and the community is a really warm and kind place, I think, and it's gone from strength to strength, and it got to the stage where I had to make a decision about the wine tourism or UK Wine Hour because I couldn't give my full attention to both. So I decided to drop the wine tourism and focus on UK Wine Hour, and it's been very rewarding, even through some difficult times over the last couple of years. So
when you say reward, I mean, there are events that it's a Twitter get together, but it's also there's a real life version, isn't there, that happens?
Yeah, I haven't had a live event for about 18 months because of family illness and bereavement and things. So, I have had a few events in London before, and even one in Manchester. And I'm hoping maybe there will be an appetite after everything to be able to get back to meeting like that. But aside from the UK Wine Hour live events, we have had sort of smaller get-togethers of people who have made friends purely through UK Wine Hour, getting together in London for a restaurant, maybe a Hawksmoor or something like that, and bringing some nice wine and just being together. And that's been really, really lovely. I know there are a lot of good friendships have come out of UK Wine Hour. So,
Saoirse, thank you very much. Now, Elizabeth, you are you are the podcast Wine for Normal People, and an incredibly accomplished podcaster, if I can. I'm going to say that because Polly and I, anybody who's followed us from the beginning know how we're holding this together with Scotch tape and bits of string.
That's how every podcaster holds it together.
So basically, Polly in her hotel room in Barcelona, me here in the southwest of England or whatever. So tell us a little bit about how you got into, because you've got a background as being a sommelier and all sorts of stuff. How did you get to be a podcaster, and where did this thought of normal people rather than wine people come in?
Well, I like to say that my podcast is like the most popular wine podcast that no one in the wine industry knows about. So it is quite popular among consumers, and people in the industry have very little idea of how popular it's become. So it's kind of a funny thing. I stay out of the industry because I started in the industry, I think. So I saw a side of it that I did not like. So I actually, I had a whole other career before this. I was in technology, market research, and then I went and got an MBA. And while I was in technology in Boston, I took a lot of classes. I was interested, but it was a black box, very hard to get into the wine industry in the United States, at least. I didn't know where to go, what to do. Then after business school, there was a very large winery that was recruiting for marketing positions. I moved out to California. I worked for them. Excellent training, terrible experience, because similar to the experiences that I had in Boston, and we are all familiar with this, the industry is quite closed. It is one of these places where it's very insidery, right? You don't know the terms, you don't know the lexicon. And I am a Jewish girl from New York. My parents didn't drink a lot. I didn't know a whole lot about wine, but I have the capacity to learn. But it always felt like when I was coming up against wine people, they did not want me to learn. Like, it was like, no, you know what? You can have this much information, but you can't have this much information. And I thought that was nonsense. So even when I went to this large winery that makes jug wine and puts chemicals and all that kind of stuff in their wine, still the attitude there was still super snotty and all this kind of stuff. And I was like, why can't we, throwing out ideas to these people about how to make change in the wine industry, they were not interested. And then circumstances changed. I moved to the East Coast to be with my now husband, and I went out on my own. And I think Sorsa's story is exactly mine, which is that everything is organic growth. It all started out very slow. It has been it's been more like a crescendo. I mean, I'm hoping I'm still not at the high point, but it has grown and grown and grown. I've never done any marketing for this thing. It's just organic. And I think that it really speaks to the fact that regular people, like regular, normal people, smart people. And I'm not talking about, I hate when people say ordinary people. I feel like normal people has a different connotation than ordinary. Some of these people are extraordinary. However, we all have the same thing in mind when I'm thinking about normal. You're great at your job, you're good at your life, and yet when you move into wine, somehow all of a sudden you become the schmo idiot down the street. I really did not like that. So instead, I just decided I'm gonna change the dialogue and make sure that when I'm talking about wine, it is not dumbed down, but it's explanatory. And, there have been people in the industry who have, stumbled upon the podcast and criticized me for that because I explain what terroir is in a sentence, again, inside of the podcast. But, you got to meet people where they are. And that is one thing that the industry does not do well, that I try very hard to do.
Okay, talking to both of you, is it fair to say that one of our problems as the wine industry is that it tends to be from the industry to the consumer rather than the other way around? There isn't a lot of listening to the consumer. And it seems to me that as people get into it, and even as people become enthusiasts, they tend to cross the line and they begin to ally themselves with the producers, with the industry. So I'm not sure that it's trade versus customer. It's actually trade and enthusiasts versus what you would call normal people. Is that a fair way of looking at it? Saoirse, how do you see it in terms of the people you see in your group?
Yeah, I think certainly, the people who take part in UK Winer is a complete cross section. So you have a lot of enthusiasts, as you say, probably not so many, maybe what you would call normal people then, maybe, but maybe some people come across it and then think, oh, maybe I'd find out a little bit more, and then they become more enthusiastic. And I think probably some of the people who are quite regular now as participants, probably in the beginning would have been quite shy and maybe a bit hesitant to join in. And even now, every week, I still get new people who say, I normally lurk and follow this chat, but now I'm going to say hello, you know, and that's great because it's fresh, new enthusiasm, every week, really. But I'd say some of the enthusiasts, as you described it, know so much about wine, actually, and I'm really, really impressed. And they're always willing to help and support and encourage other people to want to learn more. And I think that's one of the things that I always like to get across about UK Wine Hour, that everyone has a voice in UK Wine Hour, so anybody can join in. Anybody who wants to talk about wine can join in, no matter what your knowledge is. And don't be shy, because if you feel you don't know very much, there will be people there who will hold you by the hand and help you and teach you and show you things and give you tips on what to do, what to try, and maybe take things a little bit further. So I think there is a place for everybody, you know, in UK Wine Hour.
Elizabeth, in terms of your audience.
You know, so it's really hard to say. So I don't have a lot of, actually that's not necessarily true. I have trade people who listen, some who are quite sophisticated, and some who have received the worst training on planet Earth, which is very sad. People that work in wine shops, in restaurants, they have no support whatsoever. They're getting training from distributors. And so they find me, and it's wonderful, right? The community that, you know, I play in is really made up of consumers, though. And what I have realized is that there's two levels of trade here. One is mass trade, big companies. You know, we have them all over the world, you know, whether it be Treasury or whether it be Gallo, and their consumer is actually not the end consumer. And I hate to say it, but it's absolutely true. They do not have to market to regular people, nor I think should they, honestly. The only thing that they need to do is to get grocery stores and large accounts to buy their wine. Hitting the consumer, they can do any kind of consumer research that they want, and the people that buy that wine will buy it. Then there's smaller wineries and medium-sized wineries who make actual, what I would call actual wine, right? Like real wine that has a story and has depth. And yes, in that regard, we are not reaching consumers. Consumers these are, you know, regular wine drinkers, and they are not, you know, they don't align with the trade. They go and talk to the sommeliers and they feel spoken down to. They feel intimidated, and many of them will not show it. They will not show it on the face of it, but they feel it, and they tell me about it all the time. And so, you know, I think much like Sorcha, although I probably have a bigger range, I would say that people are seeking refuge. And I don't know how we wound up creating an industry where that has to happen, but that is what I feel like the tent that I have is a lot of people who are like, I really like this subject, but I really don't like the people who explain it to me. And like I said, you know, it is part of the trade.
But Elizabeth, isn't that true in so many fields? If I were to talk about opera or classical music in general, or I was talking about theatre, loads of art, I think, if you go into the art world, go into a gallery that you don't know and stand there, you're going to be the same, surely, as walking into a wine tasting. They've all got their language, they know the names, they're dropping the exhibition they went to last week and so on. Isn't it true of any area where people develop an enthusiasm?
No, I don't think so, because we're talking about an affordable luxury here, and that's really different from art, which is not an affordable luxury. If you're playing at that rate, you know, at that level, that's so few people, but we're talking about millions upon millions of people who can afford to buy this product. And, you know, so I think it's a completely different playing field. You don't have to have a lot of money to play in the wine space or to develop a passion for it. And yet, it doesn't matter whether you have a lot of money or not a lot of money, the problem still exists in terms of, I think you're absolutely right, the trade and enthusiasts or you know, sommeliers or whatever, there is a definite divide, and there's a condescension.
Actually, I've got a very good note from Amber LeBeau, Amber Spitbucket, in the chat. Actually, Amber, I'm going to bring you on to say it because it's a good note. Hold on a second. Amber, go ahead. Amber was with us, actually, has been with us this week, the day before last. Amber, go ahead. Can you?
Well, I mean, just tying in with your example that you were taking with Elizabeth, I mean, do normal art lovers really go to art galleries? Or are they the folks that are consuming graphic novels, which have tremendous art and skill in them, and things like street art, like Banksy? And that's kind of what Elizabeth, it sounds like she's talking about, between, you know, normal consumers and, you know, the enthusiast trade and those folks.
Can I just jump in to mirror that and say, I don't know if anyone has followed the discussion of romance novels on Twitter during lockdown. Helen Rosner recently actually posted about this, saying, what are the things that people are reading? I won't use all the language that she used because that shouldn't be up on our YouTube channel. But romance novels versus high fiction, when people were talking about their top 10 books, and everybody's like, you know, I'm reading Herodotus and I'm reading the Iliad, and behind the scenes we're all like, actually, we're reading cheap sex novels and Jane Austen and silly fiction, you know, that we have self-reporting that is very different from actual consumption sometimes. So does that play into the art analogy and the wine analogy as well?
I would say so. I mean, that, you know, there's that, and you know, okay, I'll give you an example. So I don't do it as much anymore, but when I was starting out, I like to say that I took in the laundry, right? Sometimes I did projects that I had to do to make some money. So one time I did a cellar organization project, an inventory project for this guy. He had, you know, a 3,000 bottle cellar. He did have some like DRC in it. He had some, you know, first growth Bordeaux that was very old. And then he had Harlan and all of the Napa wines. And I went through it, and he had been a collector for many years. And I said at the end, I gave him a document at the end, and I said, you know, in about, within like 2 years, your entire cellar is not going to be, you know, like half the cellar is not going to be drinkable. And he's like, what are you talking about? I was like, you've been holding on to these wines for a special occasion. You should have a big party and drink them all. And he's like, I don't even know what I have. I don't even know what I'm supposed to do. I just buy this stuff because the guy that I buy it from tells me I should buy it. So I keep buying it. I was like, you need to either sell this stuff and have somebody drink it in the next couple of years, or all this Napa and Australia stuff is going to be bad. I mean, it's just not going to taste good. You're past the threshold. You've been collecting for 15, 20 years, and you're at the end. And he was flabbergasted. So even a guy like him who will walk in, you know, he's a millionaire several times over, will walk into a place, behind the scenes, it's exactly what Polly's talking about. He is reading the you know, proverbial romance novel of wine. And by the way, the stuff he was drinking on a regular basis was like Albarino.
So Elizabeth, can I just this is a fascinating conversation, and we can keep going like this, and there's some really good stuff in the chat, but I'm slightly aware that I've written these words alternative media on my backdrop, and YouTube guys are absolutely in that world. Let's go down to the brass tacks. This is something that you both spend a lot of time doing. So actually, you were talking about doing this rather than a travel thing and so on.
Yeah.
Financially, is this a job? So how does does it pay for itself, and how, if so, how?
It does now. I in the beginning, I didn't make any money out of UK Wine. As I said, I was trying to use it to promote my wine tourism, and that was just not working. But somebody, a very wise lady, I think, who a lot of us know, and one of the PR ladies in London, who has become a really good friend, she said to me a few summers ago, she said, oh my goodness, you should be making some money out of this. And she gave me really good advice on, you know, what to ask for, you know, how to go about it, and not to say, you know, not to be soft and to treat everybody the same, and and all of these things. And she really gave me the courage to monetize it. So whenever I say sponsored by, then I'm getting a fee for a sponsored UK Wine Hour. It's not sponsored every week, but when it is, then I make some money from it. And I'm very open about that, and I always have it clear on the main tweets for the chat that it's a sponsored UK Wine Hour. Because this came up, sponsorship came up the other night whenever you had Amelia, I think, talking about this. And I think it's very, very important to be transparent. And so, you know, if like, for example, last night I was sponsored by a generic body, and that was very open, very popular. Everybody wanted to join in, and it did really, really well. I mean, as you mentioned, Gavin, here, how happy he was with things last night. And it was just a domino effect. It was just, the ripples went out far and wide. And I'll do the stats over the weekend, but I'm sure it was going to be one of the busier ones. But yes, I put a lot of work into that. You know, I spend days planning it, you know, and when I have a guest, I spend a lot of time organizing that. My goodness, you were my guest one time last year, Robert, and I was amazed by how amazing you were. You were able to answer so many questions. You were faster than me on Twitter. It was incredible. But I love having guests, and I love having the variety. So I never wanted just to be the same, and I don't want it always to be something that's sponsored and promoting something. I want it to be something that people enjoy contributing to and having their say. And I loved what Elizabeth said about a refuge, you know, a safe place. And I think that UK Wine Hour is a safe and welcoming place for everybody who has some interest in wine. No matter how much or how little they know, they will be welcomed, and they will never, ever be made to feel uncomfortable, I would hope, you know. So
before moving back to Elizabeth on this, so what kind of sponsors do you have? Are they generic regions? Are they companies? And do you have to go looking for them, or are they knocking on your door these days? Saoirse.
Oh, so I thought you weren't speaking to it. But, oh, yeah. Sorry, well, in the beginning, I think it was just initially just through networking and through contacts, and different PR people would speak to me and say, what can we do with you? But I have to say that since lockdown, it has suddenly boomed even more, because this is a time when a lot of generics, a lot of companies, a lot of portfolio tastings and things like that, they're not happening. People are not getting their message out there. So UK Wine Hour is the perfect vehicle now for everybody who's stuck at home. And I have no shortage of people wanting to be guests, because in the past, we've talked about certain people being guests, but they're always so busy, traveling, going to events, going to tastings, going to dinners and award ceremonies and huge international conferences. But now everybody's at home, and everybody, you know, is enjoying being part of something. And I think it's made some people realize actually that this, you know, gosh, this has been going on all this time, and I never knew, you know, so it's good.
Thanks. So Elizabeth, back to you, the monetization question for you, where, as you said, a lot of the wine people, the wine trade, don't necessarily aren't as aware of you. That I think that was an overly modest way of putting it. But how is this your activity? Let's put it that way.
Well, you know, it has been a long road. And remember that I started podcasting in 2011 before anybody knew what the hell a podcast was.
When the dinosaurs were still around.
Yeah. Yes. I was riding, you know, bareback on a brontosaurus at that point. So yeah, I mean, at the beginning, it was very tough. And I was doing, you know, again, I have an MBA. So I was like I was literally doing like consulting for things that had nothing to do with wine at that point, some wine things. And then when Serial launched, right, which was a huge success in the United States, it was an NPR show, you know, true crime, if you don't know what it is, super popular, changed the face of podcasting. And then I was able to change the business model. Also, in the early days, something in the early days, I thought, you know, I'd really like to set up like a local wine school or whatever. And some strange things started to happen. So sometimes these kinds of businesses, because, you know, I feel like sometimes I've been ahead of where other things are, and I'm finding that now also, I'll talk about that in a second, is that, you know, people started coming to me and saying, well, will you come do it? I listen to your show. Will you come do a talk for me, you know, for this association for a couple of hundred people? And I was like, okay. I mean, I love public speaking, so why not? So that started to happen, and that happened organically, and I've been very bad about pitching that, because that's something I really need to do more. That's really where I see my future going. But the podcast started to make money. The podcast is sort of the hub of the wheel, right? You know, I mean, this is a very like marketing term thing. It's the hub of the wheel. So yes, I do make money off of sponsors in the podcast. I made the decision very early on that I would not accept any money from wineries. So I will not let them sponsor. And let me tell you, they try very hard, but I do not let them sponsor. They've come to me multiple times, offered lots of money. I refuse to let them sponsor. I like the fact that I'm unbiased. I am incredibly brutally honest. I can criticize anybody that I want, and I like that freedom. So I do that. The people that I have sponsoring are people who are like, okay, well, you know, you're an ancillary, you're a provider, right? So an online sales site, a flash website that sells different products. I have tried very hard to pitch, you know, glassware companies and gadget companies, and they just don't get it. They have either the minor investment that they would make could move the needle incredibly for them, because 56% of the people that listen, I've done surveys on this, that listen to the show actually buy products, actually buy the product. So what I've had to do is go into the generic advertising world and, you know, take sponsors from AdvertiseCast, which is a great resource for me. They do podcast advertising. They're essentially my agency. And I take podcasts that I feel, I set a price, and then I take podcasts that I feel my listeners would like. So generally, you know, sometimes it's cosmetic products, sometimes it's you know, food related products, but it's things that I feel the demographic will like. And I refuse ads if I don't think that they fit with the audience. So that's one way. The second way is I have Patreon, right? So this is a way, we're getting back to the arts model, where thank goodness that finally there's this system where people can donate $1, you know, $2 or $5 a month. And I have a private site where I provide a ton more content than what I would ever provide on social media. We have very frank discussions. That is my community. I give them all sorts of like free, you know, classes and hangouts that I do not give to anybody else. They get 100% access to me. So that has been, thank God for the generosity of people. And I will tell you, you know, the first people on board were Europeans, not Americans. So I would like to give a shout out. Europeans are way more generous in the patron model at first, but now this has become very, because people do understand that, you know what, without their couple dollars a month, I can't do this. I literally cannot do this. So that has been an enormous help. And then the third thing is that because of demand, and this was totally user driven too, I teach online classes. And this goes to Sorcia's thing, which is that now the thing that's exploded for me, actually, strangely, the podcast numbers have leveled out. I've gotten a lot of new podcast listeners during the epidemic, but the regulars are not commuting. So podcasting is sort of at a level out playing field, because the commuters are not listening as voraciously as they were before. So I kind of have this, you know, sort of standstill. I mean, it's still a lot of people, but it's just, once people get back in their cars, I expect that all the new people plus all of the old will come, and the numbers will grow quite rapidly. But the online classes have been enormous. And again, getting back to this idea of refuge, during this epidemic, I have been able to, yes, I charge people to take the classes because it's an enormous amount of prep. I mean, I do so much preparation for these things, but I have been teaching online classes for 6 years. So already, it was funny because before we got on the call, Polly was like, oh, your background is so nice. Well, I have been doing this for 6 years, so I have to stage my background. My book is in the background, my Oprah, like I was mentioned in Oprah for the book, right? So, but because of that, that is another, you know, form of revenue. But again, I just tried very hard to like make this the hub of the wheel, and then all of the revenue is coming from the podcast. And it's really important to make sure that the content is awesome week after week after week. So I think I know
Polly's got some questions. I just want to check in one thing, which is the thing that fascinates me about podcasts, and it's something that if I go back over the history of radio, particularly in the US, if you go back to the early days of sponsorship of the sponsored radio shows, you had the person, the DJ, whoever he was, the presenter, would break off from what he was doing and tell you about the soap powder or about whatever it was. And then for, I don't know, 50 years, I don't know how many years it was, we went into professional advertising, and you didn't see a connection between the person who was presenting the show and the commercial side. Now I listen to Malcolm Gladwell, who I think is, is one of the people I love to listen to. And I'm listening to Malcolm Gladwell telling me about the bed I should buy, or about the supplement, the vitamin supplements he's taking, or whatever. And that's the bit that doesn't work for me about podcasts. The fact that it's Malcolm, who I'm supposed to be listening, telling me a true story, then switching across to tell me something that I know he's being paid to tell me. And I'm not talking about wine there. I'm talking about the generic problem that I find in quite a lot of podcasting. I'll stick with you for a second, Elizabeth, and listen, because Saoirse, you're in a slightly different field in terms of what you're doing. But briefly, Elizabeth, how do you see that side of things?
Yeah, I mean, it can be hard, but that's why I try really hard to pick things that I think people will like. For instance, I think it would be very out of character for me to, I mean, people have been like, do you want to do a gaming app, or, things like that? I'm not going to do that. It doesn't really fit in. I try very hard to stick with lifestyle products, so it's a little bit more natural, and things that I would like, frankly. So yes, it can be awkward. It does go back to that old model. You're absolutely right, where I am recommending products. But I will tell you, at least for me, because I have this very stubborn sense of I have to do, this is how I have to do this. I only pick products that I would use. So again, I reject a lot of products because of that, but I try very hard to just make sure. Yes, but it can be awkward for sure, but it's just part of the game. It's what you've got to do. And the choice that I had to make was either, don't take it. And, I will tell you, I have a lot of inventory. I have a lot of because I reject a lot of ads, I have a lot of inventory. So there are weeks that I have no ads because I just don't like what has come my way and I won't accept it. But, if there's I'll give you an example. There's a shoe company that did an ad. I took them not because they were big, but because they were an Italian shoe company that handcrafted everything. And one of the platforms that I really try to represent is small wineries and small craftsmanship. So this fit in that regard. I also really liked the shoes. They were expensive, but it fit with what they were trying to do. I really thought was a great idea. So again, I try very hard to do that, but yeah, it's just part of the game. It's what you got to do. I mean,
thanks.
So I want to jump in on this to say that I'm the opposite of Robert in this. And I notice in the chat, there's a lot of conversation about we skip over ads and so and so. My husband is an avid Tim Ferriss listener and has been for years and years. And now we just kind of know if Tim Ferriss recommends something, we can generally trust that it's good and we're willing to spend our money on it because we have been able to develop what feel like very personal relationships with people. So actually, I want to direct this to Saoirse because Saoirse, you are literally communicating in real time with people as UK Wine Hour is running, as opposed to Elizabeth, who's recording a podcast and publishing it. Do you, Saoirse, consider yourself now in the modern term an influencer? You have the ability to, in real time, work with the conversation, adapt to, change the flow, and effectively influence a person's buying considerations.
That's a really good question. And I think, I don't think that during UK Wine Hour that I do influence anything. I think I'm sort of like the unbiased mediator, and that I'm keeping an eye on what everybody else is saying, because even when it is a sponsored UK Wine Hour, I was really pleased to see Andrew and Amber have just commented in the chat that they have always felt that it was not pushy and very subtle, and that is really, really nice to hear, actually. But usually when I work with a sponsor, we create questions together that will make the conversation open and will allow people to talk about anything they want to. So I don't have any control over what other people are going to say, what they're going to pitch in, what they're going to recommend. So so that's, that is out of my hands a little bit, although I do try. I don't really have a problem with people saying things that they shouldn't be saying. You know, it's usually quite a nice, positive environment. But I don't think, I try more than ever now, maybe to not give my opinion during UK Winner. So I have found that it's just something that has evolved, that I guess maybe like a radio host, you know, that you're having guests phoning in and you're sort of, you know, keeping the conversation going. So, but it's important that that those people are getting to have their say. So that's where I feel. And so I think maybe the whole package perhaps is an influential package, but I don't think that me or any of the individuals in themselves are particularly influencers in that way. But I think maybe those who take part maybe see themselves as being part of something bigger, you know.
And Elizabeth, you know, would you consider yourself not in perhaps the Instagram definition of it, but in the grown-up sense? Because I do think it's noteworthy that we have 4 people sitting here who are all of like grown up, we've parented children kind of age. None of us are teenager, you know, millennials, that kind of thing. So Elizabeth, would you consider yourself an influencer in wine in the States?
I mean, not, well, you know, 25% of my audience is actually outside of the US. So, but what I would say is, you know, I don't really love that term. That's a very uncomfortable term. However, I mean, I have to face the fact that yes, if I recommend things, people generally, you know, they trust me. But it comes with, am I allowed to curse?
Fuck yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
Friday.
It comes with just, look, you know, I had to decide what I was going to do with this thing. And I just decided I was going to take away all the bullshit and just give my opinion. So people get pissed off at me constantly. And they're like, you did a podcast on such and such a thing, and then you added that you didn't like blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, what the hell is wrong with you? I have said from day one that everything that I say is incredibly meticulously researched, but it also is a ton of my opinion. If you don't like it, I don't mind. I really don't care. We can have an adult, mature conversation about that, but I am entitled to that opinion. And guess what? It's my freaking show. So I'm going to have that opinion. And someone, for God's sakes, needs to give consumers a little bit of guidance. Like, who is going to help people understand what's bullshit and what's not bullshit? You know, who's going to help people when they go into a tasting room and someone starts talking to them about the 6 Pinot Noir clones that they use in Santa Barbara? Who is going to tell them that a lot of that has to do with disease resistance and not about the fancy flavors that they're tasting? No one. So I will tell them that. And I think that in that regard, I'm happy to take that mantle on but at the same time, I certainly am not going to judge you. And I think that in that way, yes, maybe what I say does influence people and make people buy stuff because I'm excited about it and I can get them, you know, I can get them excited about it. But you know what? I did a whole episode on Petite Sirah. You can go back and listen to it. And at the end, I basically said that it's like the shittiest grape ever and I hate it. Now, that's my opinion, and I know that that's my opinion. But, you know, people walked away, they understood all of the background of Petite Sirah, and they understand why I thought it was shitty. Does that mean that people who aren't going to, you know, who already like Petite Sirah won't still buy it? No. But does it mean that maybe they'll take a critical look at it next time vis-a-vis other grapes? Potentially. And that my role, I think, is not to like force somebody to buy something, but more to say like, let's just take where you are right now and blow it out a little bit, because we can't just, the idea that in wine, we get stuck in a rut and we keep doing the same thing over and over again. Well, we know what that is. And that is what people do. They keep buying the same things. And so if I can influence people to go try something from, you know, Cumia in Spain, because they've never heard of it before, and they're okay with spending $15, I'm happy to do that. But
so Elizabeth, I think I've got a note here from Andrew Hallowell, which I'm just going to read, which I love. I wish there were more people who propagated unpopular opinions. Almost all wine comment is praise. Do car columnists talk up all cars? I love that. But I also, given the fact that I actually produce wine and I need to sell it, actually, I used to be a journalist. I am still a journalist, I guess, but I used to be a wine critic. I actually like the idea of influencers, because actually what I want to do is I want people to buy my wine. and ideally I like people to influence to buy my wine. That could be a sommelier, it could be a guy in a shop, it could be you, it could be somebody else. Actually, just having, somebody referred to educators earlier. I'm not sure about educators. I'm not sure that somebody educating people is necessarily going to help people actually decide to buy my wine. It may do, it may not. But actually there is something quite honest about talking about the word influencer at whatever level it is. And I hadn't thought about that until about 3 minutes ago while we were just talking about it. I think, Polly, you want to talk about the audiences, don't you?
I do. So, Elizabeth, you mentioned that you have a very large portion of your audience overseas. I'll let you explain what that is. One of my early questions, having both of you here, is how do we perceive the difference between what you're doing, your tone, your voice, your media that you've chosen, and your audience? So let's say the UK versus, am I correct in saying predominantly the US, Elizabeth?
Yeah.
So I'm gonna hop over to Saoirse first on this one, just to ask about the UK. You know, kinder, gentler, smaller numbers in terms of actual, you know, national population. Do you feel like you were able to go into the meanest, nastiest social media in the world, that being Twitter, and talk about a contentious topic, which is wine, and have people be gracious because you are in the UK?
That's a very interesting point. I mean, if you look at Twitter in general, being in the UK doesn't necessarily protect you from nasty people, because there are quite a few of them around, and as we see in many, many things. But I think, I don't know whether it's just, I don't know whether the UK wine art community that has built over the years has, I don't know how it's grown to be a warm and kind place. And I very rarely see any unpleasantness. But I mean, and that's a really good point, what Andrew said about talking about always praising things. I'm sure that people, well, I think a lot of the people who take part in UK wine are quite honest. That's my impression. It's my gut feeling, and it's been, you know, much to my detriment at times. I've always been very honest. So, and I think it's really important for people to be authentic. And perhaps maybe people get that vibe from the UK wine art community, that it's an honest environment, and maybe that's why they feel comfortable with the people who are taking part and what they recommend and what they're advising and what tips they give. So maybe there's just that general feeling of nice. I don't think it's to do with being in the UK. We get participants from a lot of different countries. I mean, and I can see this when I do my stats on Keyhole. I can see that we've got the reach does reach a lot in the US, Australia, New Zealand as well in particular. And so I think that we're probably more limited by the time and the time zone than by the niceness of the people, maybe. I don't know. It's just, I think that maybe I'm hoping that I convey a sense of authenticity and that sort of safe place. That's what I like to think, I hope.
Elizabeth.
Saoirse, I'm 100% with you. So what I figured out early on, first of all, when I first started, lots of nastiness, people like, you're so dumb. And especially being a woman, people love to say you don't know anything, that you're dumb, that you're like, you think you know everything. Oh, you tout your credentials. Well, I have to tout my credentials or else nobody will come anywhere near me at first. Now I don't care. But in the beginning, it starts out like that. After a while, I think that I have this, I don't know, Saoirse, you can like tell me whether or not this is what's happened with you too, is that the nasty people just fall off and you just ignore them and they go away. They hate me all the same and I don't care. But the point is, like, we are who we are. And I have told more than many people before, if you don't like the show, it's free. Turn it off and go. And I would even recommend like other shows to people. Like, if you don't like it, that's fine. You don't have to listen. I'm not like, it's not like I'm your teacher. So I think that eventually what happens is you get what you put out. And it's a really nice thing about the alternative media. you do get what you put out. So the people that the two of us are attracting, and we follow each other on Twitter and we know each other through that, and we talk to each other, you know, right? Sort of like we find each other. And so the very fortunate thing, and I think what the two of us are saying is that although we play a slightly different, you know, maybe our communities are a little bit different, we're pulling in, like, I have to say, I have the nicest group of people in the entire world. I freaking love my audience. I love them so much. I love meeting them. I love doing live events. I love them. I love hearing from them because they're genuinely cool people. And when I go and do these events live, they're people I actually totally would be friends with. And so I get to know things about them, like you probably do too, which is like, you know, I know that, like, a woman, you know, one of my listeners, you know, dad recently died of COVID. I know that somebody's having some problems with, you know, their daughter. I know that this person just had a baby, and it's all over the place. But speaking to the point about the whole, you know, demographics and where you are, I don't think that matters at all. I think you and I, Polly, we've had this conversation before. You know, I think demographics are a bunch of crap. What I think is that it's all about who you are at the root. And it doesn't matter whether you're 80 or 10, there's a certain group of people who have something inside of them and they find each other. And that is the greatest thing about alternative media, because we're niche, they're finding us.
So we very intentionally did not include social media. I mean, like, so while Sorsha, you run your program in a social media channel, I don't consider that to be the same as social media per se. So we did not include social media in this tonight because Robert and I had this discussion about, does that fall into the realm of alternative media? And this ties into exactly what you've just said, both of you women, that you are very authentic, you know yourselves, you know your people. Do you think that when we look at, say, the Instagrammer community in wine, which is all about the highlight reel, is there an equal model? Is there someone doing great things just like you are in Instagram or TikTok or Snapchat or some of the other medium that maybe we in wine don't use so much?
Shall I?
Yeah, go for it.
I don't spend a lot of time on Instagram because I don't have time for it. It's a very time-consuming thing. And clearly a lot of people have been doing an awful lot of live things on Instagram recently. But I mean, I think there are one or two people that are coming across as genuine and authentic. And I know, perhaps I'm biased because I've got to know one guy who takes part regularly and is a dedicated supporter of UK Wine Hour, and that's Bradley Horn, and he runs Wine Social on Instagram. And I've checked in a few times, and he's a good guy. He's a young guy in London, and he speaks from the heart. And I think there is that vibe of authenticity from him. And he doesn't make any money out of wine. He's not in the industry. This is for him purely pleasure. But he has had some fantastic guests on, and he had Katie Jones last week, and he had Lens Moser this week, and it's just lovely to hear this conversation. It's a very informal conversation, and I think what is lovely about it is that he speaks from the heart. And I think anybody on any platform who speaks from the heart, I think, you know, then that's worth thinking about. And I don't think of it so much as I don't think of him as an Instagram influencer. I think of him as a good guy on talking about wine, just being honest and talking about wine and for the love of it, you know. So there are people like that, I think. So
that's awesome. See, I didn't even know about that. So thank you for sharing. That's really good for us and a lot of our audience.
Yeah.
Elizabeth, what about you? Who would you see in the Instagram world if you're watching that world?
Or TikTok or Snapchat or any of the other media.
Like, I'm an old lady who has 2 young kids. I don't really have time for all that stuff. I'm not gonna lie. But you know what the big problem for me is with a lot of this stuff is the word that I always use in certain forms of media, it's very reductive. So like television, for instance, you know, wine shows on TV and things that are confined by a span of time, incredibly reductive. Instagram, even Facebook, it's a reductive medium. You don't have the opportunity to spend a full hour talking about the wine like Sorcia does, or as long as I freaking want on my podcast, because as I said, I just take as long as I need, or as short as I need. So if you don't have the freedom and you're confined by, oh gosh, I gotta worry about like, is that gonna lose the lit? I mean, at that point, I feel like then it's this reductive medium. Wine requires a lot of conversation, and it requires people to, sometimes requires people to, you got to give them a wide berth to be able to ask questions and really get into it. And I think that some of these mediums are incredibly reductive. I also think that people are fruit flies on it. You can't capture them, in terms of like, they're on Instagram, they're watching it, and then all of a sudden they get, somebody liked their post and they're off this way or that way, or they're going, so they got a notification. And so again, it plays into our worst nature, which is no focus. And, this idea that we can't sit down and read a book, or we have to be doing something else while we're listening or whatever. The idea of sitting down and, listening to something or drinking with other people or focusing, I feel like social media in that regard, really hard to do. It's really hard to get people there and keep their attention. So it's not that people don't have good intentions, but the medium itself is so reductive and fruit flyish.
I've got a question from Karen Jenkins here, which I'm going to ask on her behalf, if I may. Is there market correlation for time and attention your listeners can and want to give? I think it's a complex question. Any thought on that from either of you? I've got another time question I'm going to chip in with in a second. Do you want to look at that?
I'll mention something. Well, clearly it's UK Wine Hour, but it's never just an hour. So, I'm usually keeping going until after 10 at night. But people can dip in and out afterwards, because if they just search for the hashtag UK Wine Hour, they don't have to be present during that 1 hour. They can come in the next day or over the weekend and give their little bit of input as well. So I don't feel like it is limited by time, really, but it's just that's the focus point. That's the 1 hour of where the main questions are asked, but it's open forever afterwards. The tweets are always going to be there. What else did Karen say?
I think she's talking about the podcast demanding your attention, as opposed to, I think that you can dip in and out of UK 1 hour while you're doing other things, I guess, where Elizabeth, I guess that your podcast, you would like people to hang around to follow through, or maybe not.
They do. I mean, but again, it's a lot of commuters. Think about how you consume podcast media. You said you listen to Malcolm Gladwell. So, I listen to a bunch of podcasts too. I don't actually, I know this sounds strange, I do not listen to any other wine podcasts. Again, I'm not interested in becoming unconsciously biased. I have all of these weird rules that I've made for myself. So I don't listen to other wine podcasts, but I listen to a ton of other stuff. And one of the things I like is you can dip in and out. You pause it, you walk the dog, you pause it, and then if they're saying something particularly interesting, you might have what National Public Radio here calls a driveway moment, where you're sitting in your car like, oh, I really want to listen to that for a little bit longer. You might wait for them to finish the thought, but you can pick it up again. And most people do pick it up again, because the way that I try to do the podcast is I'm telling a long story about a region, a place, a grape, or whatever. And so the story has to continue. And if you can engage listeners, yes, they'll come back. So there isn't, it's not time, it's not confined by time either. And again, I can tell as much of the story or as little as I want.
Yes, and the answer, Polly, to the question you just asked me is yes, but I'm just going to, while you're doing that, I'm just going to ask a quick question for both you, Sorcia and Elizabeth. Neither of you have been doing this for very long, because this in question hasn't existed for that long. 10 years ago, it wasn't happening. How sustainable is it? Do you think you're going to be doing UK Wine Hour in 10 years' time, Elizabeth? Will Wine for Normal People? Because behind your head, beautifully placed, so we can all see it, is your book, Wine for Normal People. So you've actually gone back into the traditional model of paper, print and paper. Is this a moment, is what we're doing at the moment something that just happens to work now, or do you think it's sustainable?
I think this is a really good question, because I have gone through that sort of angst and thinking about it. And, you know, towards the end of last year, I've had, as I said, I had a couple of rough years with family illness and my own migraines. I suffer terribly from migraines. And sometimes I push through and I push through and I push through and I make it happen. And sometimes I feel so unwell with migraine. I think, why am I doing this? You know, but I did think, I was talking to a few friends in January when I was at a few events in London, and I was saying, you know, it will be 5 years old in July. You know, in terms of modern media, that's probably quite a long time, really. And I thought, you know, is this something that I really want to keep doing endlessly? You know, or do I want to adapt it into a different form? Or so that there are all those questions, and I think I would like to be able to do other things with my life as well, but I guess I just sort of will wake up one day and, you know, make a decision one way or the other. I mean, I don't know if I will keep it going for a very long time. And I do love it. I love the community. And it's the community that keeps me doing it, really. And, you know, at the beginning of this current crisis, I had a lot of people message me and say, please, 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 please don't stop doing UK Wine Hour because we need you more than ever now. And which was, wow, you know, I didn't realize how important it was to some people. And so I have found it actually a comfort myself in the recent weeks, because there have been times when it's just been too much to even bear to look at the news and look at Twitter. And then suddenly when you're in UK Wine Hour mode, it's all encompassing. It focuses you. You just feel this great community and this interaction. And actually, I say it boosts my oxytocin levels a bit, because, you know, there's just that warmth and there's that human interaction. And so then I think, I'm so glad I'm still doing UK Wine Hour, and I do want to keep doing it, you know. So, but like, it's a good question, Robert, and I don't know. The answer is I don't know how long I will be able to sustain it.
Hold on, I want to jump in really quickly before Elizabeth speaks. I have to apologize. Tanisha, you've been in the audience the whole time, and at no point did it dawn on me to have you come in and join this panel, because of course Tanisha Townsend, who's with us, you are a podcaster, and you and another woman in alternative media. I'm seeing a real trend here. So Tanisha, can we just have you share some of your experiences, some of the reflections that you've had, comments on what you've heard from Elizabeth and Sorcia so far?
Yes, one, I'm a baby podcaster, so I'm learning from people like Elizabeth and others that have paved the podcasting way for me. So there's that. And hello, everyone. But what I've learned. What I've learned about podcasting is, and then each of you kind of hit upon this, but podcasting is like your own space. It's like you can say what you want, be there as long as you want. And it's something that people can choose to consume from you. They can decide, like they make a conscious decision, I am going to go to this spot and I'm going to press play and listen to this. And same with Sorcia for the UK Wine Hour. While it is on Twitter, and you can go to Twitter at any moment, UK Wine Hour is an hour at a certain point in time. And that's different than Instagram or, you know, other things on Twitter where people just scroll through or it just happens to come up in their feed and they don't pay attention to it. So I think when we talk about doing things and putting information out there, we have to think about who is consuming it, how long they will consume it, and trying to keep their attention if we can.
Agreed.
Yeah, Tanisha, I mean, obviously, I love Tanisha. Glad that you hopped in here. Yeah, I think there is intent. Think about, you know, what it takes to read a book or to buy a magazine or to listen to a radio show. I think that's an absolutely excellent analogy. I'm just going back to Robert's question about how long, you know, I've been doing this for 10 years and every year I worry that like the bottom's going to fall out. So then I listen to broadcasters, again, not in the wine space, but in other places who've been doing this for 30 years. And I think that the way this happens is it just keeps going. So I don't know what will happen. Again, you know, I am looking to make sure that there's other avenues for me besides just podcasting in case that does fall out. You know, I would like to build a bigger speaking career because I think that that's something that people always want and always need. But I think the other is you got to be flexible, right? Like you can't just be like, well, the only thing I'll ever do is a podcast. Well, I don't know what's next. But I think that we both, or all three of us, have to have confidence that if we see something that is conducive to what we're good at, that we might move into that. Like I'll probably start doing more video. That's one medium that I felt I'd be shocking. I'd be 100% honest in saying that, like, I'm incredibly self-conscious about the stuff. I don't want people saying shit about like, you ugly, whatever. Like, I don't really need that. So I have been very, very reluctant to do video because I worry that that is the kind of, and I can handle people saying that I'm shrill, since they say every single female podcaster is shrill, even Tanisha with her beautiful voice. I'm sure we'll get that. But, you know, I'm okay with that because I just think in my head you're a dick and I let that go. But like, you know, it's a little more personal when it's you in a video format. So, but I think the only thing is you gotta just stay flexible. New media is new media. The one thing I will say is you can't just chase everything, and you have to know what your strength is. You have to know what you're good at, because as I have said numerous times, I think the idea of people starting a podcast because you can buy a radio, like you buy a microphone, is the dumbest thing I've ever heard in my entire life. If you weren't already somebody who was a good talker, you got to get off the mic. Nobody wants to listen to you. That's why there's 750,000 podcasts and like 3/4 of them are dead. Nobody wants to listen to you if you're boring. And it doesn't mean that like you're not really exciting in your real life, but you got to be like, you got to have something going on, right? And so, you know, it is, just because you can do it doesn't mean you should. And just because TikTok exists today doesn't mean it's going to be, what was like 3 years ago, it was like Vine and all of this other stuff. Forget it. Things that are going to last are going to last. And that's what I think we as people who've been doing this for a while are looking for.
Thank you. I think we're actually just heading over time. And I know sort of Friday evening, maybe people haven't got anywhere to go, but they may have things that they're planning to do. And I think this is the moment where Polly and I should raise our hands and say, we are the world's worst podcasters, because we talked before we launched this. Polly and I were talking about doing a podcast, and you, Elizabeth, were very generous in giving us all sorts of advice about equipment and how to do it and so on. And of course, what then happened was, instead of doing a podcast, we suddenly said, hey, let's do this Zoom thing 3 or 4 days before we launched it. And so there is a podcast of everything we do. There's a video recording and there's a podcast, and we're not editing them. They are the least proud, I think, the thing we're least proud of. And I have to say, the more I look at the sort of podcasts you produce and the work that you, Zorsha, put in, that I know you put into on UK Wine Hour, because I saw it from the other side, I think that's a lesson for a lot of people. You can't just say, I can buy a microphone and hey, I'm a podcaster, any more than you can say I can buy a camera, or I've got an iPhone and I can actually start making video blogs, vlogs, whatever. So thank you both, and thank you, Tanisha. I'm sorry we didn't bring you in earlier, but thank you all three for a fascinating show. And I think that there's a lot
for helping
here,
make
again,
it possible for us to be here. Like,
exactly.
We couldn't be doing this were it not for the work that all of you have done. So thank you.